Today I'm looking at the Samsung QN90A QLED television. This is Samsung's new Mini LED for 2021. Mini LEDs are just that, smaller forms of LED strips behind the TV to power the backlight. This helps push brightness and contrast to higher levels than traditional LED backlights. Samsung says that the TV also uses what is called their Neo Quantum Processor 4K, which also uses AI to help improve picture quality. To make things interesting, I will be comparing the Samsung QN90A to Sony's 2016 Master Series LED, the Z9D, which many still today consider to be their best LED TV. The Samsung QN90A is very thin due to the mini LED backlight system. The stand the Samsung comes with is very bulky and heavy. It is a two-step process to put together with screws. The Samsung remote is very light and simple. I would have liked more quick access buttons for things like source input or settings. The remote is rechargeable by either solar power at the back of the remote or by connecting via USB-C. It did not come with a USB cable, which is unfortunate. The remote easily worked across all my devices such as the Sony receiver, PS5, Nvidia Shield Pro. I like that the ports on the back of the Samsung are along the side rather than pointing down on the Sony. The Sony does have some really good cable management at the back of their TV, but I just prefer the Samsung because it makes it easier to get access to the ports, especially if you're using a flat wall mount. The QN90A has an outstanding picture. It is a very balanced TV. It can work in all environments. If you have a bright room and need lots of brightness, it also works well in a dark room. For both SDR and HDR content, they both look fantastic, and both modes can get very bright, much brighter than any OLED. The TV has a glossy screen which typically helps make the image pop. The anti-reflection material works well and is not distracting. To help improve contrast, many LED TVs use what's called local dimming, which helps dim parts of the screen when needed. A side effect of this is called blooming. To help control this, a TV will use multiple number of zones. The QN90A has a very high number of local dimming zones. Each screen size has different numbers. I did not notice any blooming in normal viewing of both bright and dark content. If you watch some specific screen tests to help look for it, you will notice it a little bit. I saw no issues with upscaling HD content, and motion for both 24p and 60p content was great. Compared to the Sony Z9D, they are both very close, but the Samsung QN90A does have the edge with less blooming. I would say the Samsung is a little slower on some transitions versus the Sony, and I will show some examples of that later, but it might be possible for Samsung to improve this in an update. I was also impressed with how much detail the TV keeps when viewing off angle, and how reduced the blooming is off angle as well. The TV has an ultra wide filter and it works really well, although I still recommend always watching directly in front of the television. Lastly, I did not notice any distracting DSE, or what's called dirty screen effect. This is part of the manufacturing process and can happen on all TVs, both LED and OLED television. The QN90A is an excellent gaming television. It supports VRR and ALM, and these work out of the box. There is only one HDMI 2.1 port for 4K 120 HDR VRR. However, the other ports do support 4K 60 Hz HDR VRR. The TV also supports HGIG, HDR Gaming Interest Group, which is supposed to help optimize HDR gaming. To properly use this feature, however, the game also must support it. The TV has an auto game mode setting that will detect when a console is connected, which helps to make sure you're getting the lowest input lag. This will put the picture preset mode into game mode. Previous Samsung TVs have performed poorly in game mode in terms of picture quality. Older TVs would have lifted blacks. I personally saw this with a Samsung television that I tested in 2018. With the newer Samsung TVs, this issue has been significantly improved. The QN90A looks great in game mode. Blacks are deep and gaming is super responsive. Depending on the game, there are actually 3 different game mode settings, and it will depend on what you are set to. There is a non-HDR game mode, HDR game mode, and a game mode specific for VRR. There is a handy game mode bar that you can pop up on the bottom of the screen to see the details of the modes you're in. I'm going to go through the settings menu now to show you what options are available and what I've set my preferences to. Here we have the menu. If I go over to the last part here with settings, so right now I'm in picture mode standard and I'm not using the intelligent mode. Intelligent mode is designed to basically let the TV do all the work. So I don't really recommend that option if you're wanting to tweak things yourself. So under settings, I'm using picture mode standard, but as you can see here, there are other options. So there's dynamic, which is really, bright and not very accurate. Natural is similar to dynamic, it's not as punchy with the contrast and the brightness. Movie mode is what a lot of people like to use as they think it's more of the accurate setting for movies. And then filmmaker mode, which is kind of similar to movie mode. But I like to use standard on this TV particularly because I've noticed some issues in the other modes that I'll explain later in the review. So if I go into expert settings, for my situation, I'm using brightness 35, contrast is all the way up, sharpness I've put at 5. If you go a little above this number, you'll find that you might get some artifacting on certain images, or what you'll see sometimes in movies, especially movies that are very grainy. It might actually make the grain even grainier basically, but it just won't look natural. Then we have the color, which is at the default of 25. Picture clarity settings is where you can go in and do all the adjustments for motion. So I have it off because that's my preference, but if you go into custom, this is where you can adjust things like blur reduction, judder reduction, LED clear motion, which is the black frame insertion mode, and noise reduction. The judder reduction will, if you increase this, will, as you go higher, introduce the soap opera effect that some people don't like and some people do like. It's really a personal preference. Blur reduction helps to reduce basically fast moving blur on high frame content, so 60 frames per second and above. But my preference is really just to turn all this off to have a more accurate motion from the source material. Local dimming is controls the backlight in the local dimming zones. Contrast enhancer I leave off. Basically, this setting helps to kind of boost the contrast. Sometimes it can make things look a little too overexposed, so you have to be careful. So for example, if I do this, it kind of punches it up a little bit, but if I go to even higher, it really kind of makes the image not really that great looking. Color tone is where you can adjust the picture color. So I have it at warm 1. Standard is probably I think what it was defaulted at, but I like to make the image a little warmer. Warm 2 I don't really like. I find it makes it even greener. Now I know in this photo it's a natural green image, but even when there's not like a green image, it kind of adds like a green tint to the picture. So I don't really like warm 2 for that. Now some people like it because it's supposed to be more accurate, but I prefer warm 1 because it just helps take out some of the blue that standard has, and obviously cool is really blue. So I like a balanced setting of warm 1 personally. Shadow detail can be interesting if you find sometimes the local dimming can be a little aggressive, and you can maybe lose a little bit of details. People like to talk about stars, for example. So if you're finding that in dark content that the local dimming is a little too aggressive, you can use the shadow detail setting to help bring back some of that detail. And then the color space option here is basically the preset for how the TV configures the color in general. There is a setting here that Samsungs are known to have, and again, it's down to preference. You can switch to the native mode, which really does a big change on the colors, and some people like it, some people don't like it. It really can, in some cases, make the colors pop even more, especially if you have like a lot of greens or reds on the screen. But it kind of oversaturates it, in my opinion. So I don't really recommend using native in SDR or HDR, but it is a personal preference thing, so you might like it. I personally like to leave it at auto to be a little bit more accurate. In terms of general settings, I also have all of the power saving features turned off, so you don't want to use any of this stuff. Screensaver is okay if you want to use a screensaver. Right now I'm using an Android box, the Shield, so it already has a screensaver built in. So you can also have an auto power off for the TV, a little indicator here for how much power you have on your remote. So other than that, I wouldn't use any of these other settings. It really will reduce your brightness, which is a big reason of why you bought this TV. So I don't recommend using any of these settings. And then the other area that you're going to want to focus on is this external device manager area. This is where you can make sure your inputs are all set to basically the enhanced mode, so that will give you the highest settings that the HDMI supports. So you want to make sure all this is turned on, especially if you're using any of the new consoles like PS5, Xbox. And then the game mode is, I don't have it on in this input, but basically this, if you set this on auto, then it will detect that you have a console, and it will set the game mode preset to on, so that you're getting the lowest input lag. So that's an important feature to have if you're doing any gaming on this TV. So I've loaded up a Samsung 4K HDR demo so I can show you what my HDR settings are for this TV. So if I bring up the menu and I go over to the settings, you'll see that automatically it's kept my previous standard picture mode, but you'll see it says HDR. So basically it's standard HDR mode that it detects automatically. And then I can go into further the settings in the expert settings area. So here we can see that basically, unlike most TVs, when you're in HDR mode, you're going to want to boost the brightness and contrast to the maximum, because that is basically what this mode is meant for. It's meant to sort of really push the brightness and the contrast. And so 50 is the max you can go on this TV. So it's set right to the max on both. Sharpness is the same setting I had in SDR at 5. Colors the same, tints the same. I still have all the motion stuff turned off. Local dimming I have on high, similar to SDR mode. And here's where you'll see a difference. So in HDR mode, I have contrast enhancer turned to high. There is a reason for this, is that basically you really need to turn this on, because HDR really dims your picture if you don't have your local dimming set to high, or contrast enhancer set to high. So basically it's kind of necessary to do this. I'll show you what happens when, for example, you turn off contrast enhancer. So once you start going down, you can see the picture starts to get pretty dim. It's more drastic in person than on camera. So you really get a lot more boost in brightness as you go up. But the good thing in this mode with HDR, unlike with the SDR mode, is that you're not really losing any details, or, for example, overexposing whites and things like that to like crush the detail. So I'm going to show you what my settings are for game mode. Again, they were very similar to my other settings. So right now the PS5 displays in HDR mode all the time, even on the dashboard. So you'll see it says game mode is on with HDR, and the TV automatically detected that it was in game mode. I can't even change this. I can't even change the picture mode because it's in game mode automatically, because I have that set here under game mode settings to automatically turn it on when it's detected. So I can turn this on or off if I want. And then this is where you can actually go in and tweak a little bit of more settings specific to game mode. So there's Game Motion Plus, which is basically the same kind of settings that you have in in the other picture mode where you can adjust the blur reduction, jutter reduction. This stuff is only really handy, I would say, if you're using the console for like low frame rate gaming, like 30 frames per second. It can help to smooth it out, but again, it can make things seem a little unnatural and give it a soapy effect, but in gaming it can work okay because it can feel like 60 frames per second. So that's why some people like to use this feature. This allows you to basically adjust the black detail specifically in gaming, and I find it can help in HDR games because this TV does tend to kind of crush the details. Like, it's so good at you know, giving you a nice contrast because of the local dimming and black levels that in fact it can actually make it a little too dark sometimes. So I've bumped this up just a tiny bit to help get a little bit of detail back in the dark areas of gaming, but not so much that it makes the blacks look you know, too washed out or too gray or too bright. Contrast enhancer again is very handy in HDR because it can give you a punchier image, and I do recommend using it in HDR mode when you're gaming because, like I said, it really dims the picture. Like low is, or off is really dark. On camera it probably looks still okay, but when in person it's a significantly lower brightness by going to off. So, you know, I would use low or high personally. And then color tone is the same, warm one, just like my other SDR and HDR settings. And then all these settings are also the same. Again, in game mode you can adjust this if you want to play with the colors, but again, it's basically it just saturates the colors. I prefer auto. So I want to show one of the little issues that I have with this TV that only really happens in certain scenarios. And what I'm going to do here to show what happens is I'm going to press the menu button here, and you'll see that kind of like weird effect that happens there when I open the menu. It's like a slow effect there. You see, it's like a transition. It's like it comes in and then it fades out very slowly. It's almost like the local dimming is getting a little confused, and it's just a little slow to respond to that change. And I think it's down to the local dimming on this TV, and it's probably something Samsung could fix. So I want to show another issue with one of the picture modes. And again, this is an issue that you only see if you go into the menu. It doesn't manifest itself in actual viewing content. So if I bring up the menu here, I want to show you that I'm in movie mode right now. Now I use this TV in standard mode because that's the mode that I prefer, and it's also because it doesn't have this issue. So I'm in movie mode, I go to expert settings. All my settings are the same as I have in standard mode that you'll see here. Local dimming on high. So here's what happens. So I have this menu. Watch what happens when I have the menu disappear. You see that little flash there? It's like a little carryover. The transition, there's like a delay between when you close the menu. There's like a little flash there. So now I'm going to switch over to picture mode standard to show you that it does not happen in this mode. And I'm going to confirm all my settings. Settings are all the same that are in movie mode. Local dimming is high, contrast enhancer is off. It's the same settings as in movie mode. Now let's see if it does the same thing. It's gone. So there's the menu. That flash isn't there. So the local dimming is working better in standard mode. So I just want to show you that, in fact, there seems to be an issue right now with movie mode. I'm not sure what's going on. It's probably something Samsung can fix in a firmware update if they're made aware of it. So I just wanted to show you that I think you probably want to use standard mode because it seems to be that the local dimming algorithm seems to be functioning better in standard mode than movie mode. Now let's see some comparison footage between the Samsung QN90A and the Sony Z9D. So current Z9D owners, it is finally safe to upgrade, but I would definitely still keep your Z9D. I am. The biggest wins for Samsung are in brightness, gaming, and contrast. The QN90A makes the Z9D look dim in some situations. That's impressive. There were a few oddities with the local dimming and picture modes with the Samsung, but those are things I think Samsung should be able to fix. This TV is still so new, and there are probably many future firmware updates to come. I think the Samsung QN90A is a great TV, probably Samsung's best to date.